The right window treatments change everything. Your sleep, your privacy, the way every room looks and feels. At Blinds.com, we've spent 30 years making it surprisingly simple to get exactly what your home needs. We've covered over 25 million windows and have 50,000 five-star reviews to prove we deliver. Whether you DIY it or want a pro to handle everything from measure to install, we have you covered. Real design professionals, free samples, zero pressure. Right now, get up to 45% off with minimum purchase, plus get a free professional measure at Blinds.com. Rules and restrictions apply.
Not all probiotics are created equal. New Ollie Precise probiotics are expertly made with clinically studied strains for targeted benefits beyond digestion, like skin health, metabolism, or even stress response. Find your Precise probiotic at a Walmart near you. These statements have not been evaluated by the Food and Drug Administration. This product is not intended to diagnose, treat, cure, or prevent any disease.
This is Let the Record Show. Now, here are your hosts, Judge Richard Weinberg,
essayist and commentator Eric Levine,
and Suffolk County Republican Committee Chairman Jesse Garcia.
Welcome back to Let the Record Show with Chairman Jesse Garcia of the Republican Party. Jesse is a vice chair of the New York State Republican Party and the county chair of the Suffolk County Party. With us is our co-host, noted attorney, commentator, essayist Eric Levine. I'm Judge Richard Weinberg, and I'm honored and privileged and absolutely delighted to bring back to Let the Record Show my congressman out in Suffolk County, Nick LaLota, a distinguished graduate of the Naval Academy, did naval service, have honors from his naval service. He is a lawyer, he's an MBA, and he's on the Appropriations Committee, a first-class common sense member of the Congress. And Congressman, welcome back to Let the Record Show. I'm very happy to have you here today.
Good to be with you, gentlemen. Thank you for that warm introduction. I'm looking forward to a great conversation with you and engaging you on some important topics that we have ahead of us.
Mr. Chairman, would you be kind enough to begin the questioning of our esteemed guest?
Absolutely, Congressman. It's a pleasure to be there. And for our listeners, for full disclosure and transparency, which defines the Republican Party, I do want to say not only am I a constituent of Congressman LaLota's, but I have worked with him for a number of years intimately and have worked shoulder to shoulder with him on his successful and overwhelming elections and re-elections here as a representative from the 1st District. Nick, great to have you, Congressman. Thanks for being here.
Chairman, good to be with you again. Yeah, we've been through some good battles together. They outspent us 6-1, 2-1, and 3-1. But your leadership helped us get us across the finish line. So good to be with you again here today.
I appreciate that. As we've always told constituents, not only here in Suffolk County but throughout the country, that the people of this country trusted Nick LaLota to defend his oath, to honor his oath and defend the liberties of this great country as a member of the military, and he continues to do that in the chamber of the House of Representatives. And one of the things and I will tell you, someone that knows Nick LaLota, he is a dog with a bone on certain issues. One of them being specifically SALT, the state and local tax deduction that was reduced in previous tax cut bills to $10,000 per family. Now it's been increased. It's been increased by 400%. You can speak about that. But Nick, I think it's important. You have been probably one of the most articulate representatives on both chambers and maybe even the administration on the true benefits of the middle-class tax cut, or the one big beautiful bill, which, as I just said, increases SALT deductions by 400%, gives you the largest middle-class tax cut in the history of our nations. No tax on tips, no tax on overtimes, no tax on Social Security. I think it's important that the people, maybe just now, as they're getting their refund checks, are seeing the benefits of the hard work you and the Republican majority did, along with the president, to deliver this historic tax cut and these historic deductions.
Yeah, Jesse, thank you so much. I appreciate your acknowledgement of that. It was a hard-fought battle, a necessary one. Affordability is a large issue for my constituents here on Long Island, elsewhere in New York State. when you think about Long Island congressmen doing big things, you probably think about Pete King in the 2000s helping to establish the Department of Homeland Security to protect our homeland post 9/11. You probably also think about in the 2010s, Pete King again, bringing home a lot of bacon to ensure that we recovered properly from Superstorm Sandy. Both those were difficult endeavors. And working with Congressman Garbarino, Congressman Lawler and I, three guys here in the 2020s who really stuck to our guns to ensure that we quadrupled the state and local tax deduction, and that combined with the reduced taxes on tips, overtime, we are helping to get the average Long Island family, and there's a lot of partisan rhetoric about how do these tax cuts work for different classes of Americans. Even Newsday, not a huge fan of conservatives. Even Newsday, the regional newspaper here, said that the Trump tax cuts, where we fought to quadruple the state and local tax deduction, the Trump tax cuts are giving a $3,000 tax cut to average middle-class families who need it right now. We live here in New York. New York sure spends a lot of money. They sure tax us a lot. They use a lot of our revenue to send it to the city and elsewhere in the states. So getting this $3,000 tax deduction, we think was quite meaningful for our suburban constituents here in New York, Chairman.
So I have to say, before we went on the air, I made the observation. I grew up in Suffolk County. I went to Waltham High School, and I noticed that I graduated 2 years before you were born. So this is really quite depressing. But speaking of depressing,
what am I supposed to say? Go ahead.
Well, we won't go there. But speaking of really truly depressing, so we recently had a government shutdown, the longest in history, over focusing on not the Democrats' refusal to fund ICE. But eventually there was an agreement, and the theory was that the Republicans would fund DHS fully, including ICE, through reconciliation. That seems to have been delayed. Where are we on that?
Yeah, it's been a challenging time here in the last couple of years to get both parties rowing in the same direction. Forever, the medicine that Congress took when it disagreed on specific policy items was to at least to continue doing the status quo and what was called a continuing resolution, at least continue status quo funding while we fought over the things on which we disagreed. Nevertheless, with this crazy, and some of my colleagues call it Trump derangement syndrome, some of my friends from the other side of the aisle can't seem to agree with anything the president proposes. So when some of those incidents happened in Minnesota, and some of my Democrat colleagues said that they didn't want to fund ICE until certain reforms were made, Republicans put on the table certain key reforms: body cameras for officers, an increase in the number of weeks of training, some additional transparency disclosures, some limited enforcement in certain select locations. And we were seeming to meet every demand they were saying that they needed to fund ICE. But nevertheless, at the end of the day, despite us continuing to meet their demands, Chuck Schumer would not supply any votes towards funding ICE on a status quo basis, neither with that nor with the reforms that were on the table. Only Fetterman and maybe one or two other Senate Democrats lent their votes to funding ICE. So right now, ICE and CBP, Customs and Border Protection, are being funded with money from the big, beautiful bill. It's not the ideal way to do it. The better way to do it is through the appropriations process. I don't just say that as an appropriations committee member, but as somebody who understands that that is certainly the more precise way to fund your government. But we're in this stalemate right now. I don't know what breaks this stalemate. We thought that logic and common sense and meeting demands would, but now so far it hasn't, and it's quite frustrating, to be honest with you. I think regular Americans who don't really subscribe to the full-on red or the full-on blue view of the world just want us to compromise, negotiate on some things. I think a good compromise is on the table, but one that my Democrat friends haven't taken for a few months now.
But my thought was that there was supposed to be some of this supposed to be done through reconciliation. Am I misunderstanding that?
Yes. So in order to fully complement the funding for ICE and CBP, Republicans are poised to pass what we're calling Reconciliation 2.0, 1.0 obviously being the one big beautiful bill and those tax cuts. 2.0 by necessity will be fully complementing the funding here because of slim margins in both the House, and reconciliation is always a partisan endeavor. The other party doesn't lend its votes towards it. So we're backed into this reconciliation corner, and now we need every vote to do it because we only have a 2 or 3 vote margin in the House, only a 2 or 3 vote margin in the Senate. And as I'm sure you know, some of our House Republicans and some of our Senate Republicans aren't rowing in the same direction as the rest of us. Some just lost their primaries, which I think is going to complicate their voting card here in the next couple of weeks and months. They're probably not so willing to be on the team right now. So that as well, when we get back to Washington next week, will prove challenging, I think.
So when we talk about funding ICE, and it's really kind of a metaphor or footnote for open borders and sanctuary cities and sanctuary states, which obviously no borders, no country. But so Kathy Hochul she may have already done it or is putting into place making New York State a sanctuary state. We know that Zohran Mamdani wants to continue New York City to be a sanctuary city. Those two things in terms of funding ICE, cooperating and enforcing federal law, and sanctuary states and sanctuary cities seem to me to be completely at odds and irreconcilable. So what does the federal government do in the face of states and cities violating federal law?
So Kathy Hochul is taking it to a new level. So when she first became governor, she issued an executive order that made New York State a sanctuary state, which means that her order to her state folks was don't cooperate with the feds on a matter of federal immigration. And that was a standard she set, whatever it was, 6 or so years ago when she became governor. Now she's taking it to a new level. She is seeking to prevent cooperation of any of New York's 62 counties or any of our towns or villages or cities. She is expressly seeking to ban us from cooperating with the feds. That's a new level that hadn't been tried before, and she's trying to enact that through the state budget. It's a terrible choice. But to your question of what can the feds do, the feds have the money, right? You know, we live in a federalist society. There are 10th Amendment implications, so it wouldn't be proper in most cases for the federal government to disallow a state to exercise its prerogative. But nevertheless, the feds come with a lot of money to fund different projects throughout different states, and that's where our leverage is. And just how I think it was in the 70s, the federal government conditioned its federal highway funds on the states putting in speed limits or 55 or 65. I think the way ahead on matters like this is, hey, listen, a state has its prerogative through our concepts of federalism and the 10th Amendment to do what it wants. But if it wants the federal money for different projects throughout the state, it needs to conform with certain norms. And one of those norms should be if somebody is in our country illegally, that we should have local folks help facilitate us apprehending those individuals and ultimately holding them accountable and sometimes deporting them. I mean, if we don't have borders, we're not a nation, and we should have 50 states helping us with that as well. And if they exercise their prerogative not to, I think, Eric, they shouldn't get the money.
Congressman, I agree with that wholeheartedly, and I also just don't understand how people can make an argument that states or cities have the right to nullify federal immigration law. I find it absolutely astonishing because I thought that whole issue was resolved by the Civil War from the 19th century about the nullification of federal authority on the Supremacy Clause. And you, as a good lawyer, understand that. So when you talk to your colleagues on the other side who seem to have this as a litmus test, that they have a right to be obstructionist, to block law enforcement, what do they say in real life as opposed to when they're in front of the camera? How do they reconcile their public positions on these important issues in terms of national security and public safety to what they should be caring about and protecting their constituents?
Yeah, I think you're right, Judge, to point out the two types of people that some elected officials are. Some of them are one personality on their social media feed or in front of a camera, and they're a different personality in private. But I tell you what, let's look back to Mayor Adams, I don't know, a year or so ago, maybe 2 years ago by now, when he was dealing with the migrant crisis in New York. And he got a couple of candid moments in front of cameras, and he told New Yorkers, and he, Mayor Adams, a prominent Democrat for quite some time. So even Mayor Adams said this migrant crisis will kill New York City, and it is killing New York City. And Kathy Hochul is putting in $4.3 billion of our tax dollars in order to go to free hotels, healthcare, and lawyers for migrants, 3/4 of whom don't qualify for asylum, many of whom came into the country illegally under Biden or elsewhere. So I think that what a lot of my colleagues would reveal behind closed doors is different when they would say publicly, but the nonsense has to stop, and it has to stop not just for philosophical and ideological reasons, but for public safety reasons. Of course, that a lot of these crimes that you're seeing are being committed by people who are here illegally, but moreover, the cost is through the roof. On Long Island, we need more state money to repair our roads. We need more money for our schools. We need more money for tax relief. And it is an affront to hardworking, law-abiding taxpayers on Long Island and elsewhere who are doing what they should be doing, working hard, paying their taxes, paying their bills. It's an affront to them when they're seeing billions go to folks who are in our country illegally while they can't get the bare minimum of services back home. We're paying the highest tax in the nation. New York's budget is more than twice what Florida is. It's like 2.5 times now, despite Florida having 1 million more residents. There are many things going wrong economically in New York State. And if we fix this issue, we cooperated with the federal government and immigration enforcement and stopped flushing all this money down the toilet on this crazy ideology, I think you would see, Judge, a lot less people leaving our great state.
Well, that's a very good segue, Congressman, because another thing that troubles me is, and this is something that Jesse and Eric and I talk about all the time amongst ourselves and with our guests, part of the problem is the one-party state that we have in New York. And they push through some of the most radical socialist, anti-police, anti-law enforcement policies through the legislature, rubber stamped by this governor. But what's troubling is then people flee New York City, which is the hotbed of this crazy left-wing progressivism, socialism, anti-public safety, and they go out to Long Island. They go out to the good communities in Nassau and Suffolk, or they go up to Westchester and Rockland, and all of a sudden you have this phenomenon being pushed by the members of the legislature from New York City, and the governor seems to be going along with this, is about taking over local zoning by state authority. What will that do to our communities, the quality of life of the people who moved out of the city to get to a place where they can have peace and calm?
I think what's challenging, and you don't have to have too large of a horizon chronologically to appreciate what Long Islanders and other suburban New Yorkers' history is. And my family's history and others, generally speaking, folks who came to Long Island, somewhere in their ancestry, whether it was their mother or their father or their grandmother or their grandfather, probably came to Long Island from Brooklyn or Queens and came here for a better quality of life, came here for a safer neighborhood, maybe a better school, and just a different vibe on how daily life was. Maybe a little more green grass, a little more trees around and whatnot. That's generally speaking what a lot of our family experiences are. And we want it to be different than New York City. That wasn't a disrespect towards the city. It was just acknowledgement that here in the suburban life, it's just meant to be different than the urban life. And if Kathy Hochul and Zoran Mondami and other New York State liberals get their way and take the zoning permissions and authorities away from village mayors and town supervisors and county legislatures on what they think best fits their community, then we might as well just be one big New York City as a state. That if the zoning doesn't matter and you can throw up a 10-story apartment building everywhere, then we might as well all be Queens, which I think that now when you analyze Zoran Mondami's approach towards private property ownership, where he wants to require that if you are a private citizen, you own a building and maybe you're renting out 10, 20 apartments in that building, that Zoran Mondami wants you, if you want to sell your building, he wants his government or the nonprofit to have the first right of purchase there because he wants people to forever be renters or be dependent upon government. And that's his prerogative, and his voters voted for him, and God bless, I hope they get themselves out of that mess. But that mess should not be imparted upon the suburbs of New York, which are run a lot better. Our budgets should run better, our quality of life is better. And we specifically, historically and now, have chosen to be different than the 5 boroughs. And that choice should not be taken away from us, Judge.
I think that's exactly right. Well, Congressman Nick LaLota, my congressman out on Long Island in Suffolk County, I want to thank you very much on behalf of Chairman Garcia, Eric Levine, and myself for being with us again on Let the Record Show. You're a great member of Congress. The people of Long Island and New York State are lucky to have you in the Congress. The people of this country are lucky to have somebody like you with your distinguished career and your service to our country in the military as an honored graduate of the United States Naval Academy and as an officer. I want to thank you very, very much for joining us. Keep up the good work. Keep up the good fight. And I'm optimistic about our future as long as we have people like you, Congressman, in the United States House of Representatives. Thank you for joining us today.
God bless, gentlemen. Thanks, Judge, for having me on.
Thank you.
Thank you, Nick.
Please stay tuned. We'll be back in about a few moments for more important and interesting conversation on our second segment of this week's Let the Record Show.
Let the Record Show is on the air. This is Let the Record Show, using common sense. Now, here are your hosts, Judge Richard Weinberg,
Essayist and commentator Eric Levine,
and Chairman Jesse Garcia.
Welcome back to Let the Record Show with Chairman Jesse Garcia of the Republican Party. Jesse is the Vice Chair of the New York State Party, as well as the County Chair of the Suffolk County Party. With us is our co-host and good friend, noted attorney, commentator, and essayist, Eric Levine, and I'm Judge Richard Weinberg. And we're truly fortunate to have one of the really great members of the United States House of Representatives in our first segment, Congressman Nick LaLota, a man who served well in the United States Navy, a graduate of the Naval Academy, sits on the Appropriations Committee, is a defender of the country as well as the values and the culture of Long Island and local government autonomy and control against the ideology of the left who would consume all of us. So speaking about the ideology of the left, there's a document out there called the 2024 Political Autopsy done by the Democratic Party. It was just recently released. It was forced to be released because of pressure, political pressure, as well as leaks. So let me give you my thoughts about the so-called autopsy. The purpose of the autopsy from the Democratic National Committee was to figure out why they lost. I mean, I could have told them they didn't have to have hundreds of pages. I could tell them why they lost. For the same reason why Democrats are voting Republican or independents are voting Republican. On the major issues of our time, the Democratic Party is just simply wrong. This country does not want socialism. This country does not want to have Islamists taking over parts of our territory and country, imposing Sharia law on us. They don't want to be overtaxed. They don't want to be overregulated. They don't want to be told that boys should be in girls' bathrooms and boys should be playing in girls' sports. They don't want to be told these things because these are contrary to common sense and fundamental decency. So they're wrong on the so-called 80-20 issues. That was one part of it. The other part of it is they had two of the worst candidates ever to run for national office in history, certainly in my lifetime. You had Harris, a raging mediocrity, who only looked good in comparison to her candidate for vice president, Walz, the mediocre, corrupt governor of the state of Minnesota.
Keep in mind, of course, she never received a single vote to be in a Democratic primary.
Well said.
To become the nominee.
Well, right.
Not a single vote ever.
That's right. But which leads me to the segue, which is, how did that come to pass? How did somebody who is obviously incapable of being president of the United States, one, Joe Biden, one, get elected, and then two, hold the office, and then three, have the audacity pushed by the Democratic Party to run for re-election. That's because he had a massive cover-up of his mental incapacity. This man, during the first campaign that he ran in 2020, never, ever should have been the candidate. They hit him out because of COVID. They put him in the basement. They had press releases. They put him out for 2-minute talking points where he could get by, but he was never subject to point, counterpoint, any kind of studied inquiry. It was covered up by the people in the White House, people in the Democratic National Committee, leaders of the Congress. They knew he didn't have the capacity, and this was all cheerleaded on by one Joe Biden, known as Dr. Joe, with a doctorate in education. And she was so happy to be the center of attention, to be on the cover of magazines like Vanity Fair. The most important thing to her was keeping Joe in power so she could be the center of attention. And she just recently came out and said during a debate when there was nobody home, when Biden was debating Trump in 2024, he did a great job, she told him after the debate was over. He answered all the questions, Joe. But now she admits, because she's now hawking her own book, she's saying, well, I was really afraid because I thought he may have had a stroke during the debate, trying to make an excuse for him. So that's the best they could come up. Eric, your thoughts?
Well, keep in mind, she said she was concerned. I saw the interview, at least that part of it. She said she was concerned at that moment that he was having a stroke. What wife, if you think your husband is having a stroke, doesn't run up on the stage and say, stop, my husband's about to die, call 911? She was prepared to allow him to drop, according to her own interview, she was prepared to allow him to drop dead on the stage. So this is garbage. It's all made up. It's all after the fact. She needs to come up with something, and this is the best she can come up with. It's pretty pathetic. She goes on to say that it was particularly shocking to her because she had never seen any evidence of this behavior, cognitive behavior, before the debate, and never saw any of it after the debate.
She has a distant relationship to the truth.
She has no relationship with the truth. No relationship with the truth. So this is obviously a woman who's trying to just make something up because she knows she's either committing elder abuse or she's just a pathological liar, or both. Or both. Exactly, or both. But what's the great irony here is if you go back to the 2020 election, you talk about what a pathetic nominee that Joe Biden was. Let's remember how the Democrats ultimately came up with Joe Biden. Biden was doing very poorly in the primaries. He was being eviscerated by Bernie Sanders. And the Democrats were pulling their hairs out. If we continue down this path, Bernie's going to be our nominee. And we can't have a socialist. The irony of this is just rich. We can't have a socialist as our nominee. Trump will kill him. So when they got to South Carolina, Congressman Clyburn came up quickly and he endorsed Joe Biden. Everybody rallied behind Joe Biden, and Joe Biden ultimately became the nominee because they were concerned that they would be labeled socialists. And then, to your point, Richard, of course, he just hid in the basement. They were talking about at the time what a brilliant strategy this is. Biden's hiding in the basement, let Trump go out and say all these crazy things. But lo and behold, the real reason he was hiding in the basement was because he was drooling and he couldn't go out in public to speak. Otherwise, he might have had a stroke. So, but fast forward to the topic we're discussing now.
2024.
The 2024 autopsy. Why are they writing this autopsy? Supposedly to learn their lesson. But it's a lesson they can't learn for a whole host of reasons. Because to learn the lesson and to say, we have to move on these 80-20 issues, or we have to admit we have an anti-Semitism issue, would offend and bother the Democratic Socialists in the party that have taken over the party. As Ken Martin said at the last DNC meeting last year, the DSA and the progressives are a critically important part of the big tent of the Democratic Party. We need their votes.
DSA being
Democratic Socialists.
Right.
So the Kafia Nazis at Columbia University and at colleges across the state, across the country, people protesting in the streets and making up blood libels about Israel, people who argued for open borders, people who argue for sanctuary cities, people who aren't bothered by all kinds of fraud in Minneapolis and across the country. This is the DSA. These are the voters that the Democrats need to win. So if they write a truthful autopsy, they will offend their most important voters. They will be unable to win. If you offend Zoran Mamdani, or if you offend AOC, or if you offend Bernie, or you offend the Graham Plattner in Maine, who has a Nazi tattoo, or if you offend the Democratic nominee in Michigan, this fellow Al Said, who apologizes and doesn't want to speak ill of Hezbollah. If you offend those people, you can't win. So let's not be critical of them. And even worse, let's invite them further into the tent. Let's adopt policies that will make them feel good. And that's why you end up with boys and girls bathrooms are critically important. Boys and girls sports are critically important. Sanctuary cities and sanctuary states are critically important. Transgender is the most important issue facing the United States, since the Civil War. And that's why this autopsy is utterly meaningless. If we have to accept anti-Semitism, because the DSA, we know, is an anti-Semitic wing of the party, so we have to be able to tolerate it. And that's why this autopsy is utterly useless.
Jesse.
Yeah, I agree with both you gentlemen. I mean, we really didn't need this autopsy. The Democrats didn't need the autopsy. No one in America needed this autopsy because, we got more information from the 4 or 5 books that were written about the 2024 elections than we got out of this autopsy. And honestly, every day we see the results of these autopsies, the failed policies that you all enumerated, cashless bail, taxing, and overregulations, the climate, the green, climate scam that goes on and on and on, that really just imposes more and more burdens on average Americans and average New Yorkers. But certainly, this report was delayed multiple times because it really truly said nothing. It really did not succeed in what it was supposed to do. If they did a deep dive in what they did, it is because not only did they allow the Democratic Socialists of America to come into the big tent, they are now the leaders of the party. They are now in the leadership.
They're the ringmasters.
Of the party.
They're the ringmasters of the circus.
Perfect way to classify them. This has created divisions among the parties and such. But what I see most, if you really look through this DNC autopsy, you come away with a few things that they tried to whitewash. Number one, it was delayed because they did not want to break momentum from November elections, or they didn't want to further schism their fractured party. So they blamed it on Joe Biden and that he neglected Harris. Again, let's just remember that I think we called it first here. Vice President Kamala Harris, did not receive, as you said, one vote, did not receive anything. There was no primary to select her. There was nothing. She was anointed. Why? Because originally in 2020, she was nothing more than a DIY. I'm sorry, what is it? DEI candidate. A woman, a minority, a woman. They wanted to place more about checking the boxes than actually someone that could step up and step in the event that something happened to a president. President's candidate they knew was flailing. We also knew that Harris was where they tried to blame Harris again because Harris is their number one. 2 people are their number one pinatas here, Biden and Harris, that she was locked out of major decisions with the Democratic National Committee. And this is a real good one. They failed to define President Donald J. Trump, at that point, nominee Donald J. Trump. With everything the mainstream media was doing, with everything that the big corporations were doing with social media and such, drowning out conservative voices, they did not define Donald Trump. Now, the fact is that their policies and what they were doing to America for the 4 years, 20 million illegal aliens, inflation at almost 10%, America joke on the national stage, crime running rampant, that is what caused all this. And of course, it was incomplete as to the many questions that are out there. The problem is, there are many questions out there because they don't want to ask the right questions and get the answers. Those answers come at the ballot box. When Republicans, conservatives, independents, and like-minded Democrats who have lost their party vote against the Democratic Party in droves. And that's what's propelling the Republican Party and Republican candidates here, because we are the party of the Big Tent. Now, I just want to speak to Jill Biden again a little bit. As you mentioned, she's now on a book tour to try to sell books, and she's trying to change the narrative. And I think that something that's more telling, even more damning than her own words and her own hypocrisy in this, because you're right. You're both right. They embarrassed her husband. It's elder abuse. She wanted to see him, I guess, allow him to die on stage the way she was describing in this interview. But Michael LaRosa, the former spokesperson, someone very close to Jill Biden, blamed Jill Biden and the staff. They tried to hide him, he said, to capsulate what he said just recently. I think it was appearing on an interview on Thursday of this week. That's all you need to know about the Democrats and the state of their party. Two things. They were a failed party. They hid Joe Biden in 2020, and they were able to utilize COVID and the changes in election law to steer an election their way. In 2024, after being able to lay out and see the agenda and the record that hurt Americans by Joe Biden, Americans in droves, almost 80 million people voted for Donald Trump in a new order, a new world order where America is first. We were talking about tax cuts. We're talking about deregulation. We're talking about opportunities and creating jobs. And America now is back to being the superpower on the world stage, a nation that's respected, not like it was under Obama and under Joe Biden. So I think that's where we are right now. And seriously, it's just an abomination of the Democratic Party. They can't seem to get out of their own way. Why? Because they're still kowtowing to the very fringe, loud part of their party, the Democratic Socialists of America, who are evil and dangerous for this country.
So the only thing I would add is, first, I want to speak to my wife in particular right here. If you ever think I'm having a stroke, call 911. All right. That, and to a point, Jesse, you just mentioned that the Republican Party is a Big Tent party. That's great. But, warning, sometimes the tent is too big, as we see what the Democrats just did. I don't need and I don't want people like Tucker Carlson or Megyn Kelly
Candace
Owens and anti-Semites like that in our party. They're freaks. And the freak show we all know is outside. Those freak shows, as we know, are outside the Big Tent. They're down the alley. So
I don't count them as a Big Tent. They may want to call themselves Republicans. They may try and give guidance and such, but you see their influence almost nil now under this president, under the leadership of the elected officials we have now. Their voices right now, what they're doing is they're doing exactly what the DSA is doing and Democrats. They're just trying to get attention so they can basically profit off a click on an internet or something going viral. Exactly. They do not speak and are members of this party.
Yeah, we can't make the same mistake the Democrats did. The Democratic Party's lost. Republican Party's got to fight that.
The difference with the two parties, though, is that the DSA, which is the equivalent to those individuals you just mentioned, they're the leadership.
100%.
Of the Democratic
I agree.
Party.
100%.
I agree with both of you gentlemen, and I also agree with Elias, who just gave me the signal. We have to take a break. This is Let the Record Show with Chairman Jesse Garcia, the Republican Party. Noted attorney, commentator, and essayist Eric Levine. I'm Judge Richard Weinberg. Please stay with us. We'll be back in but a few moments with our final segment with more important and interesting conversation. Please stay with us.
This is Let the Record Show. This is Let the Record Show. Now, here are your hosts, Judge Richard Weinberg,
essayist and commentator Eric Levine,
and Suffolk County Republican Committee Chairman Jesse Garcia.
Welcome back to Let the Record Show with Chairman Jesse Garcia, the Republican Party. Noted attorney, commentator, essayist Eric Levine, and I'm Judge Richard Weinberg. Well, as we talk today, taping this show, there's more news. Supposedly, there's a deal that's ready to be authorized by the President of the United States, Donald Trump, with a 60-day ceasefire in the war between Iran and the United States. So let me give you my thoughts. And the listeners will forgive me if I repeat myself.
Say it again.
Yes, sir, I will say it again. No deal is better than a bad deal. No deal is better than a bad deal. Now, I understand there are political pressures on the President of the United States because the midterms are coming and people are bitching and moaning about the price of gasoline. Let me respectfully submit, you have your priorities backwards. The threat of Iran is not to the price of gasoline, folks. It's an existential threat to Western civilization, our way of life, freedom of speech, assembly, association, economic opportunity, public safety. It's a regime, the Iranian regime, dedicated to one proposition. America must be destroyed. Israel must be destroyed. All other countries must fall in line to their hegemonic ambitions to create Sharia law worldwide. That's what's at stake, not whether you're paying a few cents more on gasoline. I'm sensitive to paying the price for gasoline. I'd be more sensitive if Iran had a nuclear weapon and took out Chicago or New York or San Francisco. I'd be more sensitive to that. And I think you probably would be more sensitive to that too if you thought about it clearly. You need clarity of thought. You need clarity of vision. The only thing that will protect us against this Islamist threat, one that's dedicated to the proposition of death to America, is regime change. Anything less is unacceptable, unworkable. You cannot cut a deal with these people. The only thing you can depend on these people to do is break a deal, delay negotiations, drag it out, thinking that puts pressure on us to fold or to modify to let them stay in power. What is victory for this regime? Victory for this regime is staying in power and control. What is victory for the United States of America leading a worldwide coalition, a Mideast coalition with our ally Israel? Victory is regime change. Victory is taking their capacity to build ballistic missiles, taking their capacity to develop nuclear weapons, their ability to fund terrorism. Keep your eye on the ball. Everybody says, well, we'll open up the Straits of Hormuz. Let me just tell you what that means. The Straits of Hormuz were open. It was the Iranians who closed it, and we checkmated them, but we took control of it. But this is free navigation. Iran has no claims, morally or legally, to control that body of water. Get the hell out of there. You do not belong there. Do not use this to blackmail the people of the Middle East or of Europe or of America for your ridiculous behavior. Your ridiculous behavior, which means that about 50,000 of their own people have been executed as political dissidents. And Trump at the beginning of this said, hope and help is on its way. Well, if we allow this regime to stay in place, he has not honored that commitment that hope and help is on its way. They will be subjugated once again, and the world will be at risk. And I say no deal is better than a bad deal. And the more time we waste negotiating being played, because they're playing for time, the more ballistic missiles that will be made, the more armaments will come from China and Russia, the more they will suppress their own people. And we have to put an end to this once and for all. Eric.
Yeah, so it is Thursday, May 28th at 3:20. And you summarized correctly that there's this announcement that we are on the cusp of or have made. We're not 100% sure this agreed to the 60-day ceasefire. Assuming there is a ceasefire, as of right now, we don't know what's in the terms of this memorandum of understanding, so it's difficult to opine as to whether or not it's a good deal or a bad deal. Frankly, I'm on the side of it's impossible to make a deal with these people. It's not a matter of you have to make a good deal. I don't think it's possible to make a deal with these people. As I've said many times, we have to understand who this and what this regime is. They see the nuclear program as existential, that it is essential to its survival, and they will never give it up. So I'm not sure where we're going with this. More on that in a second. 60 days. We have had an armada of military assets in the region for a few months now. The last 50 or so days, just at the ready. Now it's going to be another 60 days, all those assets there. For how long can our men and women in uniform stay at the highest levels of alert and not go kinetic? First of all, economically, we can't do it. I mean, it's just extraordinarily expensive to have it there. So let's do the job. But secondly, to have our service members at such high states of alert and then not do anything or holding back, it just doesn't seem really feasible to me. Now, I'm not a military guy, so I may be completely wrong, but I just question the wisdom and ability of us to have so many assets out there, just kind of waiting and watching. But then there's some other fundamental questions going back to the issue of, can you make a deal? Who are we talking to? Supposedly, whatever deal we ever make, the high exalted mystic ruler Ayatollah has to sign off on it. But he's in a cave somewhere, assuming he's even alive. We haven't seen him since his supposed election. And so there's no digital communication with him. So whenever there's a communication with him, it's my understanding that you have some runner with a piece of paper that goes to this guy under the rock that he's hiding under so that he can read it and give his opinion or eventually sign off on it. That doesn't seem to me to be, the best of circumstances. Do we even know that we're dealing with this guy? I mean, I hope American intelligence knows whether or not he's alive, but we certainly don't. I mean, it reminds me of the movie Sleeper. At the end of the movie, we find out that Big Brother is just a nose and that they're going to clone this nose and turn it into a full body so that Big Brother can come back. So for all we know, the Ayatollah is a nose. That's all. Maybe that's what we're negotiating.
Who knows?
Who knows? Exactly. But on the one hand, we're told it's difficult because all these attacks. There was an attack today on Kuwait. There have been, which is a violation of the ceasefire. Over the last few days, there have been a couple of American, what we've called defensive attacks against Iran because they were trying to lay mines in the harbor in the Straits of Hormuz, which is also a violation of the ceasefire. And the explanation is, well, that's the IRGC just trying to derail this. Well, the IRGC is probably the single most important body ruling body in Iran. And if they're trying to derail it, how can we possibly be making a deal? The alternative is that the people we're speaking to are in cahoots with the IRGC, and they're just blaming the IRGC. It's not, we're the moderates, they're the extremists. Just talk to us.
Bad cop.
Yeah, good nonsense, of course. But even if that's true, if they're in cahoots with one another, so how can you negotiate with them? And this idea, if we're going to have an agreement regarding the Straits of Hormuz, we'll agree to open it up. We don't need anybody's permission to open this up. This idea of mommy, may I? No. We're the greatest power in the history of the world. These are international waters, and we demand that these straits be opened, and if you won't open them, we're going to open them for you. And then if there's going to be a deal, that's how you make it. You tell them we are going to open it, and then we go about opening it. But I think part of what is happening and what I'm hearing is that there are kind of two factions. I'm sure there are more, but there are two general factions in the party advising Donald Trump. On the one hand, you have the folks like Marco Rubio, Pete Hegseth, and General Kane, who are advocating for true regime change, advocating for a more kinetic and a military solution. And then you have the J.D. Vance and Steve Witkoff group that is advocating for the let's make a deal piece.
This is not a real estate deal.
No, it's not a real estate deal. It's not a game show either. But I don't think that the people that are insisting that let's just make a deal with these people and go on our merry ways if nothing has happened, I just don't think that's particularly realistic. But my understanding, what I've been told, this could be completely wrong because this is all hearsay, but that at some point, Vice President Vance actually went to the president and said, here's something I recommend. And the president said, no, because I don't have enough. I'm not getting enough on the nuclear issue. And then the president went back to the Gulf state, and then he was prepared. He was in fact prepared to start a military action. And some of the Gulf states said, please don't, because we're very concerned about our civilian infrastructure, in particular Saudi Arabia and the desalination plants. If those are destroyed, how will the Saudi people drink water? That's a legitimate concern. But what Trump then turned to them and said, and this is where the expanding the Abraham Accords came out. Trump turns to them and says, look, if you want me to make a deal and so it won't be as good a deal as it could have been if we, used our military again. What I need something from you. What you need to give me is you have to join the Abraham Accords. And then, of course, the Saudis said, no, we can't do that. We need a Palestinian state. And it's more likely that my blind 17-year-old Shih Tzu poodle is going to win the Kentucky Derby than there's going to be a Palestinian state anytime soon. Palestinians have, put the kibosh to that. So now we're hearing about this deal. We don't know what's in it, or this MOU. It's not even a deal. It's the MOU. We have no idea what's in it. I can't tell you if it's a good idea or if it's a bad idea.
Yes, you can. If it's a deal with this regime, it can't be a good deal.
Well, I don't know that it's a deal. I mean, an MOU isn't a deal per se. It's a memorandum of understanding.
I agree.
So I don't know what's in it. Whether or not there's some delay. Look, if what comes out of this MOU is that the Ayatollah's nose has agreed to sign on to, yes, you can have the you can have the enriched uranium, and you could take it to the United States. Then we are somewhere. I don't see that happening, but unless and until we can see what's on the piece of paper, it's hard to know. But I would say by the time the show airs Sunday morning, we'll know.
Jesse, I just got the word. We have 1 minute, so give me a 1 minute capsule. What do you say on this?
This president has demonstrated that while we are concerned, he is listening to this show. No deal is better than any deal. He is engaging in that. Also, we have known that this president is very, very he loves the surprise element. Whether it's a memorandum of an understanding or a ceasefire, that does not mean that he is not prepared at any moment to go kinetic, to use his military to enforce the will of the American will in that region and rid that area. The one thing that is consistent, that is important to each and every one of us, is this. No nuclear enrichments allowed. They have to end their program. We need to get all the nuclear dust. That is the key there. Until Iran comes to that understanding and accepts that, there will be no deal. And the United States has an armada that's ready to eliminate that regime in that area, in that country.
Well, this has been Let the Record Show with Chairman Jesse Garcia, the Republican Party, noted attorney, commentator, essayist Eric Levine, and I'm Judge Richard Weinberg. Once again, we want to thank you for listening. And as always, God bless you, God bless your families, and of course, God bless America. And we look forward to being with you again next week on Let the Record Show.